Last night, trans people in Kansas started receiving letters telling them their driver's licenses were no longer in effect, meaning they can't even drive themselves to the DMV to get new ones. This draconian measure is one of the most drastic actions taken to ensure that trans people in the United States cannot exist in public life. It's completely outrageous, and Republicans in Kansas were able to push this bill into law with little public oversight. And yes, this is exactly what Nazis did in Germany under Hitler. It's happening here in America right now. Independent trans journalist Erin Reed published this piece today. Kansas sends letters to trans people demanding the immediate surrender of driver's licenses. Legislation that does not include a grace period, so trans people are losing their driver's license immediately. Here's an example of one of these letters that Erin Reed published. It was sent on February 23rd, just 3 days before the law went into effect. But some trans people in Kansas have said they didn't even receive a letter. The recipient's name has been blacked out here to protect their anonymity, but we can see that this letter was sent by the Kansas Division of Vehicles with the subject line, driver's license. It says, "Dear Kansas credential holder, House substitute for Senate Bill 244, enacted by the Kansas legislature, overriding Governor Kelly's veto, requires Kansas issued driver's licenses and identification cards to reflect the credential holder's sex at birth and directs the Division of Vehicles to comply. What does this mean for you? If you have received this notice, our records indicate that upon publication of this law in the Kansas Register on Thursday, February 26th, that's today, your current Kansas credential will no longer be valid. Additionally, please note that the legislature did not include a grace period for updating credentials. This means that once the law is officially enacted, your current credential will be invalid immediately, and you may be subject to additional penalties if you are operating a vehicle without a valid credential. What do you need to do? Pursuant to this new law, if the gender/sex indication on the face of your current credential does not match your assigned sex at birth, you are directed to surrender your current credential to the Kansas Division of Vehicles. Upon surrendering the credential, you will be issued a new credential reflecting the gender identification consistent with statutory requirements. If you have any questions regarding procedures for obtaining a legally compliant credential, please contact the Kansas Division of Vehicles or visit your local driver licensing office. Can you appeal this notice? Yes. If you believe you have received this notice in error, you may appeal. However, please be advised that the filing of an appeal will not preserve the validity of your current credential and associated driving authority. We apologize for the inconvenience this causes you. An apology in this case is not going to cut it. This is a clear way to force trans people out of public life for no reason other than the fact that they are trans. This law immediately suspends the ability for trans adults living in Kansas to be able to drive themselves to work, to a doctor's office, to a school to pick up their child, or to the DMV so that they can get a new driver's license that displays their sex assigned at birth, which does not match their gender presentation. The local Kansas City Star reported on this news and spoke to some trans people who have been affected. One of those people is Representative Abby Boatman, a Wichita Democrat and the only trans member of the legislature, who received the same notice on Wednesday showing her that her license will be invalidated as of today. She said, "The persecution is the point." Obviously, being transgender does not impact someone's ability to be able to drive. There is no logical reason for this law to exist. It was originally predicated on the idea that trans women shouldn't be in women's only spaces, which is still transphobic and discriminatory, but this part of the law takes that a step further. Someone's individual car that they drive is not a woman's only space. It is their space, and they have already shown through their ability to obtain this license that they are able to drive. So now this discriminatory measure is directly impacting the ability for trans Kansas residents to be able to move voluntarily around the state. The Kansas City Star reported that some transgender Kansans said they had received the letters. Others who have changed the gender markers on their driver's licenses, state IDs, and birth certificates said they had not yet received notification from KDOR as of Wednesday evening. Iridescent Riffle, a transgender woman with a Kansas driver's license who lives in Grandview and commutes to work in Lawrence, said she hasn't received a letter yet. I don't want to get a misdemeanor over just trying to go to work, said Riffle, who changed the letter on her license from M to F in 2023, shortly before Attorney General Chris Kobach's legal intervention forced KDOR to stop accommodating such requests for more than 2 years. I'm salaried. I'm not working hourly, and not everyone has that same privilege as me, said Riffle, who got approval from her boss to work remotely until she figures out how to drive legally in Kansas. Now, that original injunction, which stopped trans people from being able to change the gender marker on their driver's licenses, was lifted in October. And according to the Kansas City Star, last month, a spokesperson for the Kansas Department of Revenue told the Star that the agency had processed over 150 gender changes since that injunction was lifted. Officials say they expect around 1,800 people to have their identity documents revoked. So that's nearly 2,000 people who all of a sudden cannot drive themselves today, all over a completely needless, discriminatory law that is clearly aimed at curbing the rights and ability for trans people to live freely and exist in public. Imagine having to tell your boss that you can no longer come into work today because the state has stolen your driver's license from you. That is the reality that hundreds of trans people are currently facing in Kansas for no reason other than the transphobia that has been fomented in particular by Donald Trump's administration and Republicans over the last decade, but also some Democrats who have unfortunately jumped onto this campaign to delegitimize and demonize trans people who pose no threat to their communities. That's why people are drawing a clear and accurate historical parallel between what's happening to trans people in Kansas today and what happened to Jewish people under the Nazi regime in Germany in the 1930s. This Blue Sky post says, in 1938, the German Reich invalidated all German Jewish passports. They had to surrender them, after which their ID would mark them as a Jew. In 2026, the state of Kansas invalidated all correct trans driver's licenses. They must surrender them, after which their ID will mark them as trans. This user went on to add, see, this is why it can be painful to know too much history. This post implies that what is happening in Kansas is similar to what the Nazis did. But it's not just similar, it's identical. In 1933, Nazis revoked trans people's documents before 1938, paragraph 175 and 183. People often forget that the Nazis' earliest actions were actually against trans and gender nonconforming people. Nazis stormed libraries containing information and documentation about the existence of LGBTQ, trans, and gender nonconforming individuals, and they burned them. They destroyed information and the real lived experiences of trans people, discriminated against them, and then began targeting other ethnic minorities and groups such as Jewish people. That's history that's easily forgotten, in part because it's happening again right now. The Trump administration has already taken steps to scrub the existence of trans, LGBTQ, and gender nonconforming people from official government documents and academic materials. That type of censorship, as well as the evil rhetoric aimed at trans people around the world, both youth trans individuals and adult trans individuals, all of that together laid the groundwork for Kansas being able to rip trans people's driver's licenses away from them today. The Kansas City Star, as well as trans journalists like Aaron Reed, also point out that this isn't the only draconian anti-trans measure currently on the books in Kansas right now. There are also discriminatory anti-trans bathroom bills that prohibit trans people from being able to use the bathroom of their choice. Instead, in government buildings, they have to use the bathroom that matches their sex assigned at birth, regardless of what they look like. Because, as many people have pointed out, a lot of people who have transitioned no longer represent the sex they were assigned at birth whatsoever. You have trans men with full beards who are now being asked to use the women's restroom. And that's supposed to make women feel better? That's supposed to make women safe? I don't think trans people of any gender pose an active or outsized threat to any woman. However, the idea that women would feel uncomfortable with someone who looks like a man in their public restroom, that's not rectified by this law. It's actually enforced. There's also the bounty hunter portion of this law, which incentivizes people to report their trans neighbors for using the wrong bathroom by giving them a financial reward for doing so. And as Aaron Reed points out, should any transgender person be caught driving without a valid license, they could face a Class B misdemeanor carrying up to 6 months in jail, as well as a $1,000 fine. Kansas already requires county jails to house inmates according to sex assigned at birth. So, this law isn't just about preventing trans Kansans from being able to drive, it's also a trap. If they get caught driving with their old, now invalidated license, they could be thrown in jail. Let's say a trans woman in Kansas drives to work today with her old driver's license that has now been invalidated. If caught, she could be thrown into a men's prison where she would face systemic sexual abuse and also be forced to detransition. This law doesn't just prevent trans people from driving. It shows that if they get caught or if they have to drive, they could be punished with torture and sexual violence. Reporter Melissa Gira Grant posted the following on Blue Sky. She said, to do this, anti trans lawmakers in Kansas moved fast to change the law, overrode the governor's veto, and pushed for the legal changes to go into effect nearly immediately. That kind of power to void gender on official documents, to compel gender conformity, is terrifying, and it will not stop here. Alejandra Caraballo, a Harvard law instructor and trans woman, posted, because of the National Driver Register, since their licenses are suspended, trans folks cannot move to another state and get a new license until they remove the suspension on their existing Kansas license. They can't even escape this by moving to another state. Alejandro went on to say, I can't even begin to describe just how fucked up this law is. People cannot drive to work, to school, or even the DMV to fix this without the threat of being arrested for driving on a suspended license. It literally removes the ability for trans Kansans to participate in society. Kansas lawmakers bypassed the committee process by doing a whole bill amendment and pushing this in 2 days. They then overrode the governor's veto. They used emergency designation to make it go into effect immediately. There's no grace period. The amount of targeted animus here is staggering. This was all in response to the Kansas Supreme Court striking down attempts by the Kansas Attorney General to do this last year. It's absolutely horrifying that lawmakers are even able to do this. They are placing so many of their constituents in direct danger. One thing that I'm thinking of is not just the impact to trans people themselves, but also the rippling effect that this has on the entire community. We have the examples we previously discussed, such as people not being able to go into work, which can be absolutely devastating for somebody who's working hour to hour on minimum wage just to afford to live. In addition to that, I'm thinking about things like trans parents who have kids who go to school, who go to after school activities and friends' houses and other places where they need to be picked up from. What if their parent can no longer pick them up, leaving them stranded? The impact and consequences of this law are absolutely staggering. And it just goes to show that Republicans in Kansas don't care about anybody other than themselves and their horrifying, hateful ideology. They want to crush trans people and force them out of existence. But the reality is, trans people will never cease to exist. Trans people have been around for centuries, as long as we've had records to keep. They're not going anywhere. And laws like this are just purely cruel and authoritarian. They should terrify everybody because if we let them get away with this to some of our most vulnerable community members, it is a stepping stone for them to go after other minority groups until we wind up in the exact same situation that Nazi Germany was in under Hitler. That is not a lazy attempt to compare everything to Hitler and Nazi Germany. It is literally step by step exactly what the Nazis did. And it's happening here in America right now at the exact same time that the Department of Homeland Security has been allotted billions of dollars to build modern day concentration camps across the country. These camps are supposedly to hold detained illegal immigrants, but we already know that American citizens have been detained by ICE, in addition to being shot and killed by ICE in broad daylight. So, what is to stop them from then repurposing these camps to detain trans people or any minority group or any dissenter that they please? This is the exact pathway, the road that America is currently driving down. This isn't a hypothetical. This isn't something that could happen in the future. This is happening right now, today, to trans people in Kansas. Hundreds of trans people are being affected as we speak by this horrifying legislation. Award winning trans writer Nico Stratus points out the quote, just asking questions to legitimate questions about fairness in sports to the state doesn't have to consider us as real people pipeline working exactly as designed. We can expect that Republicans are going to be transphobic and attempt to enact these kinds of dystopian measures because they've been telling us that's what they plan to do since day one. What's particularly frightening is when Democrats and supposed trans allies put up with this whole facade of we're just asking questions and we need to see what the science says and it's about fairness in sports and it's about protecting women and children. No, it's not about any of that. All of these measures hurt women and children. They actually hurt everybody, but trans people most of all. Trans people deserve the full rights afforded to them by the US Constitution, basically, basic level. But trans people don't deserve to be discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. Trans people deserve the same freedoms and rights to self determination that the rest of us enjoy. Trans people deserve to be able to drive down the street to their job or their kid's school or a doctor's appointment. It's as simple as that. Do we really want to live in a country where people have different sets of rights depending on the way that they were born or the way that they choose to live? Of course we don't. It's a ridiculous notion. Researcher and therapist Jessica Camp posted, as of tonight, licenses of trans people across Kansas are being invalidated en masse, enabling the overnight criminalization of an entire group of people for going about our lives. It's often said you never know when you're living through history. So let me assure you, that's what's happening now. Historian Jacqueline Antonovich quotes this to add, when my adult trans kid was planning a move, several family members suggested cities closer to home with the argument that although X state is red, X city is blue. And my kid was like, nope, I need the full power of this state behind me. And this is why. Actress and writer Abigail Thorne posted, Kansas has overnight invalidated the driver's licenses of trans people, a pointless cruelty that upends their lives. If Brits think it won't happen here, think again. Groups in the UK who want the same thing are routinely invited to consult with Labour and normalized in our press. And trans journalist Parker Malloy posted this thread that I really wanted to end on because I think it hammers home what is wrong at the core of this legislation. Parker said, Kansas just invalidated the driver's licenses of every trans person in the state. They're being told to surrender their current licenses and get new ones listing their birth sex. No grace period. Get caught driving with your now invalid license and you're looking at jail and a fine. This is getting a lot of attention because it's so extreme and it deserves that attention. But I worry some people will walk away with the wrong takeaway. Like the problem is only that Kansas retroactively canceled people's licenses. Like if they just blocked future changes or forced people to correct their documents at renewal, that would have been fine. It wouldn't be fine. When a trans person's ID doesn't match their appearance, Every interaction where they have to show that ID becomes a potential outing. A traffic stop, a job orientation, a TSA checkpoint. You hand someone your license, and suddenly they're looking at you differently, or asking questions, or worse. Kansas did something unusually aggressive, but the version where you just quietly force trans people to carry documents that contradict who they are, that's unacceptable. It's discriminatory, and it's meant to eliminate trans people's privacy. Trans people deserve the same respects and freedoms afforded to cis people. We cannot tolerate any forms of transphobia or discrimination against trans people based on their gender identity. It is wrong all of the time, full stop. If you've been misled or wrong about these issues in the past, it's not too late to change your mind and fight for what's right now. Trans people are an extremely vulnerable minority, one of the most targeted by the federal government and Republicans across the country. They need all of the help and support they can get from their cis allies and neighbors. We all have to stand together and show that this is wrong and it will not be tolerated. If you can't find it within your heart to support trans people because they're people and they deserve it, then at least consider the fact that this will not end with trans people. The government and Republicans will continue to escalate their discriminatory behavior against all types of marginalized groups, and that will come to affect you at some point, whether you think so or not. So start now. Stand against discrimination in all cases, whether it pertains to trans people or not. Trans people deserve so much better than this. We all do, and we can't stay silent about it.